We know little about the old Israelite calendar, apart from the laws of the festivals, but the Mishnah, the collection of Jewish law made at the end of the 2nd century AD, fully describes a system which the Jews had worked out under Babylonian influence. Erdman's Handbook to the Bible. When the Jews returned to Palestine after their Babylonian exile, 516 BCE, they brought back with them the Babylonian astronomy and way of reckoning time. What is a Jew? Page 108. In order to fix the beginning and ending of the Sabbath day and festivals, and to determine the precise hour for certain religious observances, it became necessary to know the exact times of the rising and setting of the sun. According to the strict interpretation of the Mosaic law, every day begins with sunrise and ends with sunset. Jewish Encyclopedia, page 591 to 597. Days were reckoned from morning to morning. Following the reign of King Josiah, and especially after the Babylonian exile, a number of significant and enduring changes occurred in the Israelite calendar, showing that the Jews gradually adopted the Babylonian calendar of time. The 7-day week persisted, despite its failure to divide evenly either the month or the year. The day, however, was counted from evening to evening after the Babylonian fashion. New Catholic Encyclopedia, Volume 11, page 1068. So far as we know, the Babylonian calendar was at all periods truly lunar. The month began with the evening, when the new crescent was for the first time again visible shortly after the sunset. Consequently, the Babylonian day also begins in the evening. Exact Sciences in Antiquity, page 106. Numerous scholars have argued for the existence in Bible times of a sunrise method of day reckoning. The evidence for the sunrise reckoning is significant and cannot be ignored. The time of the crucifixion and resurrection, chapter 5. In Israel, the day was for a long time reckoned from morning to morning, and it was in fact the morning with the creation of light when the world began. The distinction of day and night, and time too, began on a morning. Genesis 1 verse 3 to 5. The opposite conclusion has been drawn from the refrain which punctuates the story of creation. There was an evening and there was a morning, the first, second, etc. day. This phrase, however, coming after the description of each creative work, which clearly happens during the period of light, indicates rather the vacant time till the morning, the end of a day, and the beginning of the next work. The change of reckoning must therefore have taken place between the end of the monarchy and the age of Nehemiah. This will bring us to the beginning of the exile. Ancient Israel, page 181 to 182. The first evening was not the gloom, which possibly preceded the full burst of light as it came forth from the primary darkness and intervened between the darkness and full broad daylight. It was not till after the light had been created and the separation of the light from the darkness had taken place that evening came, and after the evening, the morning. It follows from this that the days of creation are not reckoned from evening to evening, but from morning till morning. Commentary on the Old Testament, the first book of Moses, page 51. In early Jewish practice, it seems to have been customary to reckon the day from sunrise to sunrise, or rather from dawn to dawn. Thus the law for the praise offering, Leviticus 7:17, specifies that this sacrifice must be eaten on the day upon which it was offered, and that nothing may be left until morning. The repetition of the law in Leviticus 22 verse 30 is even more explicit. On that very day when it was sacrificed, it shall be eaten. You shall not leave anything of it until morning. Clearly the next morning is here reckoned as belonging to the next day, and not the same day as the preceding evening and night. In other words, the day is reckoned here from sunrise to sunrise. Likewise in Exodus 16 verse 19, the manna was given to the people in the morning, just at dawn, and before the sun had become warm, 16:21. It was to be eaten only on the day upon which it was gathered. Nothing was to remain over until the next morning. That which did so became foul. Here too the day seems to have been reckoned from dawn to dawn. From Matthew 28 verse 1 it may be inferred that the practice of reckoning the day from sunset to sunset was not universal in Israel, but in certain circles the older practice continued for several centuries. It is manifest that the day is still reckoned here from dawn to dawn. This is also the implication of the parallel passage, Mark 16 verse 1, Luke 23 verse 56, and 24 verse 1. Seems to imply the same. Finally, it is significant that in the Second Temple, throughout its entire existence, the practice seems to have been in all ritual matters to reckon the day from dawn to dawn, and not according to the latter practice from sunset to sunset. Even the rabbis who themselves reckoned the day from sunset to sunset and refused to admit the legitimacy of any other practice, or rather absolutely ignored all divergent practice, nonetheless had to admit the validity of the interpretation of Leviticus chapter 7 verse 15. The day was at one time reckoned from sunrise to sunrise. The earlier practice, which continued until the time of the secondary strata of the priestly code, was to reckon the day from dawn to dawn. The latter practice was to reckon the day from sunset to sunset. It is impossible to tell exactly when this change in the mode of reckoning of the day took place in Israel, and what causes brought it about. Possibly it may have had something to do with the introduction of the lunar calendar instead of the solar, for the lunar calendar naturally presupposes a reckoning of the day from nightfall to nightfall. It was possibly coincident with the revision of the festival calendar which took place in the period after the time of Ezra, and was, in all probability, the work of the Sepharim or of the Great Synod in the 4th century BC. This may also be inferred from the statement in the Talmud, Berachah 33a, that men of the Great Synod instituted the ceremonies of Kiddush and Havdalah, the solemn sanctification of the Sabbath on Friday Eve, and its equal solemn ushering out of the Saturday Eve. In other words, ceremonies specifically marking the beginning and close of the Sabbath as at sunset. These were ceremonies for the Jewish home instead of the temple. This, coupled with the fact that in the Second Temple the old system of reckoning the day from dawn to dawn continued to be observed, as we have seen, may perhaps indicate that this entire innovation was the work of an anti-priestly group or party in the Great Synod. The sources of the creation story, Genesis 1:1, 2-4, pages 169 to 212. A new stage in the investigation of the problem of the calendar of ancient Israel was marked by the appearance of a learned article by E. Koenig in 1906. He maintains that two distinct calendars were current in ancient Israel. The first, a solar calendar. The solar calendar was well adapted to the conditions of the simple agricultural life which the Israelites lived during the first period of their sojourn in Palestine. It reckons the day from sunrise. The second calendar was a lunar solar year. The day now came quite naturally to be reckoned from sunset. This second calendar was obviously based upon Babylonian models and was adopted under direct Babylonian influence at about 600 BC, when Babylonian religion and general agriculture began to affect with steadily increasing force the Jewish exiles in Babylonia and through those of them who returned from exile, the Jews who had remained in Palestine. This broadly sums up Koenig's conclusions. The time of the transition from the reckoning of the day as beginning with the morning to the reckoning of it as beginning with evening. That in the earlier calendar and in the literature which records this, the day was reckoned from the morning, presumably from sunrise, while in the later calendar and the literature pertaining thereto, the day was reckoned from the evening, must be eaten upon the day upon which it is sacrificed, and that nothing of it must be allowed to remain over until morning. Obviously, the implication here is that the next morning is no longer a part of the day upon which the sacrifice was offered, but mark the beginning of the next day. Elsewhere, we have presented quite a mass of evidence which establishes conclusively that the earlier practice in Israel during the biblical period was to reckon the day from sunrise to sunrise. That the earliest period of Israelite sojourn in Palestine under calendar 1, the day was reckoned from morning to morning, is established by a superabundance of evidence. This in turn, together with other important considerations, would point to a time approximately about the beginning or the first half of the 3rd century BC, as that the introduction of the new system of reckoning the day. Supplementary Studies in the Calendars of Ancient Israel, pages 1 to 148. It is interesting to note the wide variety of commentators who may not agree on many points of doctrine, but do agree that the scriptural day begins at first light in the morning. If you have any verse in Scripture that clearly states a day starts in the evening, then we would love to know. But the conclusion of the matter is, if you have no Scriptures to support your belief, then you have added to Yahweh's commands and are practicing vain traditions.